Language in our country is a very sensitive issue that also has historic activities to prove that. What we have done now, we've formulated an internal policy as a department to determine whether 3 key areas of our mandate will be achieved. 1 being to upskill African languages. 2, to ensure that any other person that is not in a position to deal with our languages can be in a position to have access to those languages in terms of promoting multilingualism. Thirdly, which is very, very important to us, is to promote social cohesion of ensuring that all our learners can be in a position to interact, mingle, and talk to each other as part of promoting the rainbow nation of our country. All these particular issues are indeed enshrined in our constitution. So what we have done now, we've formulated an internal policy document, presented it to internal stakeholders. The minister, together with MEC, will then deal with the finalities of that particular document, and after that, we'll be in a position to present it to our major stakeholders, in particular our teacher unions, because it will affect their condition of employment, as well as the SGBs, as well as the institutions that will assist us, because the current status, as you have asked, Olani, is that it's a voluntary aspect where people can determine whether to use languages or not, and current format of voluntarily determining whether we can use our language or not, it has drastically failed, and we believe that a new intervention is required, hence this approach.
Okay, just explain to us how it has failed. Is it because people aren't taking up African languages?
You cannot just introduce without giving the necessary backup. There are 3 critical areas that you need to give necessary backup. 1, it's formulation in terms of the teacher material that need to be utilized and availability of those particular materials. 2 is the empowerment, training, and development of your educators, which is a very, very important aspect so that educators can be in a position to indeed move with time. Thirdly, which is very, very important as well, is the issue of timetabling, of ensuring that these languages are also accommodated within the timetabling systems and other related matters. You might be aware that the current system, in most instances, it relies on SGBs to fund some of the posts of teachers that are teaching some of the languages. And it also relies on the SGBs to determine whether they need an extra language or not. And in them determining that, they sometimes feel that it's not important and therefore downgrade the importance of languages and give it in the and put it in the back burner. The new method will ensure that every school, as long as a public school funded by the state, will be compelled to have an African language within their system. As I said, obviously after due necessary consultation with the relevant stakeholders.
Mr. Colditz, the burden then that will bring to yourselves as the Federation of School Governing Bodies. The department is considering compelling you now to ensure that there are African languages.
Well, Tolani, let me firstly state that we support the idea of promotion of multilingualism in all our schools. There are certain practical problems that need to be thought through very carefully, and the planning needs to be done very carefully. The point is, as has been said now, at the moment, if you offer a third language at your school, a second additional language as it is called, it is done by the parents. It's funded by the parents. It's the subject is presented by a teacher appointed by the school governing body. So it's not just a question of putting it on the back burner because school governing bodies are not interested or they do not regard it as important. The point is that we cannot continue funding it. We cannot attract the necessary teachers with the necessary skills and competence to teach at the level of a first language. That's what makes it so difficult. And the other thing is, the other important thing is which language do you choose? It's very easy. If you're in, say, a rural area in KwaZulu-Natal, you'll obviously choose Zulu. And in the Free State, you'll choose Sesotho. But what happens to the child whose parents are transferred from KwaZulu-Natal to Free State? Now, that child has to now take Sesotho instead of Zulu. And what makes it even more difficult is where you have industrialized towns or cities where children from all different backgrounds are accommodated in one school, and it makes it difficult to introduce a single indigenous African language. You take, for example, towns where there are mining activities. They attract workers from all over the country, and the workers that come there may not even be of the majority group of the indigenous language in that particular area. So, yes, there are extremely difficult practical problems which we need to address and plan for properly and thoroughly.
Okay, we'll attend to those problems in a minute, but let me bring in Professor Kaschula, because, and I'm getting a couple of SMSs, for instance, where we need to go back to the basics about whether or not multilingualism is desirable in the first place. There are people who are saying, well, why do you bother in the first place? I mean, English is a language of business, and if a person speaks English, that's it.
I think, Xolani, we mustn't lose sight of the fact that language it's a powerful emblem of groupness. It's an emotionally charged symbol, and it's a sensitive issue, as Mr. Kekana has indicated. But it's a central pillar to our social identity, and even primarily to our individual identity. So I think, although it's a contested area, I think it's very important that we empower people in languages that they understand best. What we have in terms of our policies is kind of like a language maintenance, but in reality there has been a language shift, which I think, as Professor Neville Alexander points out, is linked to class and identity. In other words, the emergence of a middle class, which is underpinned by English and so on, with specific type of accent. And he talks about a linguistic fault line where we have those that are empowered in English and those that are sort of marginalized because they don't have equal access to English. So I think if we can agree on the fact that we can't all have equal access to English, then we run the risk of marginalizing 60% of our population from the mainstream economy, for example, and that's really a really tricky issue, in which case you're going to have a linguistic fault line dividing the haves and the have-nots, and I don't think that augurs well for the future of the country. I think what is important to understand, and I think we speak with one voice almost, Mr. Colditz, Mr. Kekana, and myself, is that multilingualism is important, and we need to empower students or learners in languages that they understand best, and alongside that we need to empower them in English as well. There's a difference between medium of instruction and teaching a language as a subject, and we need to grasp what that difference is. And I think primarily we need to teach languages properly, and what I'm hearing is also that we need to find the appropriate practical mechanisms related to funding and so on, and looking at the precinct of the school, how many speakers of what languages are in the school. If Absa Bank can localize their ATMs, for example, in specific suburbs and find out what languages families speak in those suburbs, we can do the same in the schooling system. So I think there's practical issues that are involved. The value of learning in a language that you understand best.
Please wait.
Okay, well, we seem to one of the callers. I suspect it may very well be Panyaza Lesufi. But, I just wanted to pick up something, because you're making a number of very valuable points here, Professor. But you talk about language maintenance. Is that what is happening at the moment, as opposed to advancing, developing African Indigenous languages?
Well, if we think about language maintenance, Xolani Buti, it's really a process of protecting and enhancing a language in situations where language shift is looming. Now, if we look at our Constitution and the policies that we have in place, they are protecting our languages, but in reality, as the schooling system is at the moment, and from what I'm hearing from Mr. Colditz and what we are seeing at university in terms of the students that are coming in, that are mother tongue speakers of African languages that cannot read and write these languages but speak them, there has been a language shift towards English, and I don't think it's a new thing that's going to start in 2012 because of whatever policies in place. I think it started already in 1994. So, that's the reality in a sense. There is this language shift that's happening. But what I think is more important is what we should be emphasizing in 2012 is a return to a type of a language ecology where we take into account, the intertwinings between language and other aspects of our social life in South Africa. So in a sense, we need a more fully fledged sociology of language, and in a narrower sense, something that represents our language diversity and the protection of small or endangered varieties like Isindebele and so on, and Chivenda. And giving people access to those languages. Now, the practical aspects of that seems to me where we are finding a hitch, because really, the policies are in place. The language maintenance is there. But when it comes to implementation is essentially about getting things done. And that's where we haven't really got to grips with what type of policies we should have in place. And we should be asking ourselves as a nation, I think, as South Africans, what is it that we want? What is it that we want our society to look like in the future? I do not believe we can have social cohesion if we don't have appropriate use of language policies and implementation of these policies in the schooling system and at the university.